confident and a vigilant America stands ready tonight to seek an honorable peace and stands ready tonight to defend an honored cause, whatever the price, whatever the burden, whatever the sacrifice that duty may require.
The Vietnam War was perhaps the most divisive American war this century. I'm Adrian Cronauer. I was the disc jockey portrayed by Robin Williams in the hit movie Good Morning Vietnam. While that film had many humorous moments, what I'm about to describe to you is a matter of utter seriousness. Americans Abandoned is the story of U.S. prisoners of war left to die in communist prison camps, not only in Southeast Asia, but in Korea and the former Soviet Union. Listen and watch carefully, for what you're about to see may shock you, but it strikes at the very heart of America. March 1973. After years of fighting the communists in Southeast Asia, the United States calls it quits. And its sons who fought the war and were captured by the enemy, some imprisoned for 8 or more years, prepare for their time of liberation and a return to the land of the free.
Well, when I saw that C-141 land on the tarmac in Hanoi, the first U.S. aircraft I've seen that close, you kind of melt like in a pool of butter. You just kind of melt because you're so thrilled about seeing the aircraft land, seeing the Air Force uniform get out of the aircraft, and you know freedom is just a few minutes away. It's just a sheer happiness. It's kind of hard to hang in there day after day. In my case, 2,110 days. You've just got to have absolute belief that someday your country is coming to get you. Had I not believed that, I could not have lived for 6 years. Because I went to Vietnam, I was prepared to be killed, to be wounded, even to be captured, but I was not prepared to be abandoned by the country that sent me there.
I had strong reason to believe that Jim Grace was alive in captivity and would be returning with Homecoming 1. And the reason that I believed that was I had identified a picture, a POW, post-capture POW picture of him, shown to me by the Department of Defense in 1972, that I believed is Jim Grace.
Jim Grace was shot down over Laos on June 14, 1969. A U.S. government report said Grace had fallen from a hoist while being rescued by helicopter. He was declared killed in action, or KIA. Then, this prisoner of war film turned up. Could the prisoner in it be Jim Grace? Bickle says the Pentagon originally dated the film June 16, 1969, 2 days after Grace was shot down, but then later said the film could not be Grace because it was taken 6 weeks before Grace was shot down. Bickle set out to prove the Pentagon wrong. She says she obtained 60 sworn affidavits from friends and relatives of Jim, all identifying the man in the film as Jim Grace. She also hired forensic anthropologist Michael Charney of Colorado State University to do a computer analysis.
We enhanced the difference between the light and the dark on the forehead. And then the last thing we said was to find the edge. You give the computer a command, and what it does is it runs a line between the light and the dark, between the hair here and the forehead, you see, the skin. And it's the perfect match of his. Is it Grace? So far as I can tell, it's Grace. I have no reason to believe it isn't.
So with this picture, I simply assumed that he was in captivity and he would come home. But when the planes came home in 1973, Jim Grace wasn't on any of the planes.
Might Jim Grace and others like him have been abandoned, left to die in some communist POW camp? The war ended in January 1973 with a negotiated ceasefire. 591 prisoners, or only about 12% of those requested by the U.S., were returned during Operation Homecoming in February and March of 1973. Laos was another story. More than 500 pilots were shot down over Laos during the war, but none were returned, even though the Pathet Lao indicated they desired to release American POWs. A United Press International dispatch dated February 19, 1973, stated, "A Pathet Lao spokesman said his group is holding American prisoners of war who will be released after a ceasefire goes into effect." UPI reported that Pathet Lao leaders had a detailed accounting of prisoners and where they were being held. How many were they holding? Another UPI dispatch from Vientiane, Laos on March 25, 1973 reported, U.S. sources believe that a substantial number of missing in Laos, perhaps as many as 100, still may be alive. The Lao made it clear, if American prisoners were to be released, first, Laos needed a separate ceasefire agreement with the United States, one separate from the agreement with North Vietnam. A Washington Post report dated February 18, 1973 stated, Pathet Lao say, no truce, no POWs. But the U.S. government appeared unwilling to negotiate a ceasefire with the Pathet Lao. And American chief negotiator at the Paris peace talks, Henry Kissinger, wanted American prisoners held in Vietnam and Laos returned in Vietnam through Hanoi. On March 26, 1973, the North Vietnamese announced they would release the last of the American prisoners on March 27th and 28th. They said, according to the Associated Press, the U.S. demand that it also release POWs captured in Laos is beyond the Paris Peace Agreement.
After having asked for 3,700 plus men, they gave us their list, the Vietnamese list of 591, which I happen to be one of. We accepted that list. We came home in 4 groups, 591 men. Last group, March 28, 1973. On April 13, 1973, this is public record, not conjecture. On April 13, 1973, the U.S. government said, they're all dead. Well, my question is, what happened to those 3,700 plus we asked for early in 73 that we declared dead April 13, 1973? What happened to those men?
And why would the U.S. government declare American prisoners of war were dead less than 3 weeks after U.S. sources reportedly stated to UPI that as many as 100 were still alive, and after the U.S. originally had asked for 3,700 plus men? A secret letter dated February 1st, 1973 was delivered by Henry Kissinger to the North Vietnamese Prime Minister, just 5 days after the signing of the Paris Peace Accords. The secret letter stated, quote, "The government of the United States of America will contribute to post-war reconstruction in North Vietnam without any preconditions, and that post-war reconstruction will fall in the range of $3.25 billion of grant aid over 5 years," end quote. Other forms of aid promised had been estimated at between $1 and $1.5 billion for a total of at least $4.3 billion. Members of the U.S. House and Senate were not notified of the secret pact, and in the ensuing weeks, testimonies of returned American prisoners of war were delivered to Congress. Many told of being brutalized and tortured by their communist captors. Retired Navy captain and former prisoner of war Eugene "Red" McDaniel was one of the most severely tortured.
A very brutal torture. We're talking about 7 days, 7 nights without sleep, kneeling on pitted concrete 24 hours a day, electric shock treatment about 3 hours per session, and you beaten daily with a fan belt about 50 times. That's the physical torture, but the psychological torture is worse. They'd call you up sometimes for interrogation and say there's been a change in your family. You'd say, "What is that change?" They would say, "No need to know." So you live with that for the next 3 or 4 years.
Angered over the reports of torture, members of the U.S. Senate on April 6, 1973, voted 88-3 to bar any aid to North Vietnam unless Congress specifically approved. 1 week later, a congressional proposal to prohibit any future aid to North Vietnam was announced. The next day, the Pentagon declared the prisoners dead. Approximately 2 weeks later, White House staffers Bob Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, and John Dean were forced to resign. The POW issue was put on the back burner as the Nixon administration became entangled in Watergate.
The Vietnamese were skeptical of Richard Nixon's problem because he was weakened politically by Watergate. They weren't sure he could deliver $4.3 billion, and he did. He never gave that. So being skeptical of Richard Nixon, they decided to keep collateral, meaning prisoners.
It wasn't the first time the communists had kept prisoners for ransom. The Vietnamese kept French prisoners. They were negotiated out years after the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. And evidence suggests that Joseph Stalin held American and Allied prisoners of war after they were liberated from Nazi prison camps at the close of World War II. Stalin was holding the POWs hostage and pledged not to return them until he was satisfied that all Soviet soldiers and citizens were forced to return to the communist USSR. More than a week after World War II had ended, General Dwight Eisenhower was aware that Americans were still being held by the Russian dictator. This secret message, dated May 19, 1945, and sent to General George Marshall in Washington, estimated the number of prisoners in Soviet control at 25,000. Those Americans never returned home. American prisoners taken during the Korean War were also transported into the Soviet Union. This secret memo to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow detailed the desire of then Secretary of State John Foster Dulles to inform the Soviets that the U.S. government knew American POWs from Korea were transported into the USSR. A combined reconnaissance activities report dated February 24, 1953, stated the American POWs moved into the USSR were technical specialists employed in fields such as mines and factories. And this CIA report, dated July 15, 1951, told of 78 American POWs taken to a camp in Shanghai, China. Former Defense Intelligence Agency Director Lieutenant General Daniel Graham confirms the reports that the Soviets took American prisoners from North Korea.
They'd come and with a list of specialties and pick and find out whether such specialties existed among the UN prisoners in the camps in North Korea and in China.
Including Americans?
Including Americans, sure. Mostly Americans. And then they would ship them out.
This CIA memo, dated as recently as March 9, 1988, indicates some American POWs are still being held in North Korea. It states that as many as 11 Caucasians, possibly American prisoners, were seen on a collective farm north of Pyongyang, North Korea, during that same month. Did history repeat itself What are the chances that American prisoners from the Vietnam War were also taken to the USSR? Former National Security Agency analyst Jerry Mooney says during the Vietnam War, the Soviets targeted certain American pilots and others with technical knowledge for shoot down and capture. Once taken prisoner, they would be moved to a special underground prisoner of war camp.
There was approximately 50 to 75. At this location, there were the Friends. This is how the Vietnamese referred to the Soviets. From there, they were taken to Bai Tung Airfield and flown to Sam Nua. Sam Nua is tentacled Moscow bound.
Mooney says U.S. intelligence estimated that during the Vietnam War, the Americans were taken to the USSR by ship rather than by plane.
The ship went down, the evidence gone. They took them out by aircraft and it went down. There's evidence all over the place.
Captain McDaniel believes his navigator, Kelly Patterson, was taken to the former Soviet Union and may still reside in Kazakhstan. He explains why the Soviets may have been interested in interrogating Patterson and others like him.
The Russians were concerned about the SAM missiles that were shooting out of aircraft, why they were not successful, because it took 42 to hit our A-6. And the same missiles circled Moscow. But also another reason is none of us who came home in 1973 were ever asked about nuclear weapons. Yet we all had nuclear targets in the Soviet Union and in China. And perhaps they took Kelly Patterson to the Soviet Union to get that information from him there.
Testimony before the Senate Select Committee on POW MIA Affairs in 1991 by former Soviet KGB official Oleg Kalugin and former Vietnamese General Bui Thien suggest American POWs were interrogated by Soviets. Committee member Senator Robert Smith explains the significance of that testimony.
All American POWs who came home never gave any indication that they were ever interrogated by Russians. So if that's the case, where are the ones who were?
Smith and the chairman of the Senate Select Committee on POW MIA Affairs, John Kerry, were appointed to a joint U.S.-Russian commission in 1991 to comb KGB files for answers regarding the fate of the American prisoners from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
As General Scowcroft said the other day, and I back him fully, there's no hard evidence of prisoners being alive.
49 in North Vietnam, 200 in North Vietnam, 4 in South Vietnam, 184 in Vietnam, 70 to 80 in North Vietnam, a truckload, 15 to 20 in a truck, 2 in Laos, a group in North Vietnam, 50 in Laos, 230 in Vietnam to the CIA, 219 from a doctor who allegedly took care of them.
Former North Carolina Congressman Bill Hendon was a consultant to the Defense Intelligence Agency back in 1983. Detailing live sighting reports in 1991, he told members of the Senate Rules Committee evidence is overwhelming that American POWs are still alive in Southeast Asia.
Many of the reports are, I believe, highly reliable. 50 in Laos, double polygraph confirmed. 6 in Laos, double polygraph confirmed. 30 in Hanoi, double polygraph confirmed. The accounts are highly specific as to location. I saw them in a cave. He tells where. There were 6 at the Bai Tung Mountain Prison just outside of Kam Kuit in Khammon Province, Laos.
Thousands of Indo-Chinese refugees fleeing war and oppression have settled in camps along the Thai border. More than 800 have given first-hand live sighting accounts. Ku Yang is a Hmong refugee who says he saw 2 Americans while in prison in Laos in 1978.
They were taller than the regular people, and their skin was lighter. They were coming out to do the cleaning and to do some of the worst road that it has to be fixed. Like the 2 Americans were given some axes, knives, where they can fix the road to be better.
Refugees are not the only ones with knowledge of living POWs. Former National Security Agency analyst Jerry Mooney says the U.S. government knew from the beginning that it would be difficult to get all the prisoners back because the Vietnamese considered them to be war criminals, not prisoners of war. And he says the U.S. intelligence community, behind the scenes, was keeping track of American POWs.
While the overt side of government, the political and policy side, declared them dead just to calm down the American people and close Vietnam out, the highest national requirement from the highest levels of government remained on the books in the intelligence community. And that requirement was to identify, search for, locate, and bring home these POWs, particularly in Laos.
So after more than a half dozen congressional and executive investigations, the message to the American public remained the same. There is no hard evidence that American prisoners are still being held. However, the operational side of government was directed to keep looking and keep identifying POWs.
And somehow between 73 and 76 or 79, it fell to the back burner or it fell through the cracks. The two sides of government, overt and covert, with the changes of administration, changes of personalities, somehow the POW issue lost its priority and was sent to the back burner, and now we have a mess.
Mooney says he kept a list of American POWs he had tracked. It was created to give U.S. negotiators specific, positive confirmation of prisoners for use in talks with the Vietnamese.
My list, my original list of live POWs is 305, and that's a short list. That's the shortest list of anybody who is speaking on this issue, because to get on my list was hard, very difficult. My list could have been, easily have been maybe 500 to 600.
Only about 2% of the American prisoners tracked by Mooney returned to the United States during homecoming in 1973. Some of America's former intelligence chiefs have shared Mooney's belief that American prisoners are still alive in Southeast Asia. The director of the CIA during the Reagan administration, the late William Casey, told a group of 5 U.S. congressmen in October 1985, quote, "Everyone knows they're there, but there's no public support to get them out. What do you want? Another hostage crisis? We f***ed up. It's my job to see that we don't f*** up again." End quote. Former National Security Advisor to President Reagan, Robert McFarlane, made this remark October 9, 1985, before a private luncheon group in New York. McFarlane said, quote, "There have to be Americans there. There's more that we ought to be doing than we are. I wouldn't pretend to you that we have done enough to even start. That's bad, and that's a failure." End quote. In June 1985, the former head of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, General Eugene Tai, publicly stated his belief that as many as 50 to 60 Americans were still being held in Southeast Asia. A little more than a year later, a Pentagon commission headed up by Tai concluded that American prisoners are still being held. Tai said there was a, quote, "large volume of evidence," unquote. And some members of the U.S. Congress say they believe prisoners are still being held. Congressman Robert Dornan, Republican from California, tells of a conversation he had during one of his trips to Vietnam as a member of the House POW MIA task force.
I said to them in Hanoi, "We whipped your butt. We beat you in every battle. We had total air and water supremacy. But you whipped us in Paris. Congratulations. And let's talk Turkey about getting our guys out." You know what one of the communists said to me? I'd never said this before camera before. "You raise the millions, and then we'll talk." That's what he said to me, and I'll polygraph on it.
In late 1991, during hearings before the Senate Select Committee on POW MIA Affairs, Bill Bell, the man who headed up the Pentagon's POW office in Hanoi, testified he knew of Americans held in captivity in Southeast Asia long after 1973.
In the last 3 or 4 years, you have reason to believe that there was Americans still alive.
That were alive.
When?
After the PW release.
For how long?
Unable to determine that, sir. Possibly 2 years. 3 years.
Former Air Force Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Colonel Al Schinkel has tracked American POWs in Laos for 2 decades. He says he discovered 324 of 500 pilots shot down over Laos were still alive. He says the CIA ordered him out of Laos because he had located POW camps and was getting in the way of American policy. Schinkel details a conversation he had with the Lao ambassador to Thailand in December 1985.
I asked him if they did indeed have living American prisoners of war, and he said, yes, we have them in large numbers. And after a lot more discussion in which I tried to work around and figure out a way that we could get them back without loss of face for us or for him, I asked him if they were available for recovery. And he said, yes, they were available for sale.
Schinkel says no action was taken after he reported the conversation to the U.S. government. Vietnam War hero, former Green Beret commander, POW hunter, Colonel Bo Greitz, says very early on in President Reagan's first term, the administration had a plan to rescue American POWs. Greitz says one of his private rescue operations, known as Velvet Hammer, was put on the back burner because the president wanted to use the Army's Delta Force.
The operation wouldn't have succeeded, I don't believe, because they were going to fly off of a flotilla out of basically the Gulf of Tonkin, come across Vietnam into Laos. I just don't think it would have worked. But he was excited about rescuing prisoners of war.
President Reagan announced he would make the resolution of the POW-MIA issue America's highest national priority. In this letter to MIA family member Gladys Fleckenstein, dated May 19, 1982, the president suggested behind-the-scenes efforts. Mr. Reagan said, I know there is a perception that little action is taking place, but this is because the operations that are going on are of a covert nature.
Good hit. Ready? Swing! Oh!
Work hard, play hard, and always leave quality time for the family. Those are attributes Albro Lundy III learned from his father, Albro Lundy II. The beach was always a special place for the Lundy family, but the good times with Dad were cut short.
I feel cheated out of a whole lifetime, a whole generation of not being with him, missing the teaching I'm sure he could have given me, would have given me, missing the training, missing the discipline. Before he was sent to Vietnam, and there was something ominous as a little boy, knowing your dad was going to be going over and fighting in a war. I said, I don't want any children. I don't want them living in a war like this. And he looked at me and he said, no, Albro, we're the people that should have children. We're the people who need to have children so that we can bring them up right, so that we can have them work to make this world a better place. I learned the joy of children. I learned the beauty of children, and I learned that inner sense of just loving to be with children, holding them and knowing that they're gifts from God. He gave me that.
Albro Lundy II never experienced the pleasure of seeing his oldest son mature and start a family. On Christmas Eve 1970, Lundy was flying a search and rescue mission in the Ban Ban Valley region of north-central Laos when the engine of his A-1E was hit by enemy ground fire. One witness said he saw someone in Lundy's parachute as it was deployed. Others reported no one was in the chute. Lundy was declared killed in action, KIA, 2 days after the incident. For more than 20 years, Albro III, his mother, sisters, and brothers believed Albro II had been killed in Laos.
I think there are different...
Albro III's wife, Kathy Lundy.
He was dead. And it's one thing to get used to somebody being missing. And it's just a different thing to get used to somebody being dead and having them come back to life. Albro got the first word of this the night before Easter. And to us that was symbolic, a time of rebirth.
Suddenly, Albro Lundy II, John Robertson, and Larry Stevens were resurrected. The nation was captivated when this shocking photo depicting 3 American prisoners of war was first made public in the summer of 1991. Was it possible that these 3 Americans were still alive in some gulag in the jungles of Southeast Asia? Government officials have attempted to discredit the photo, but there has been no factual or scientific proof that the family's IDs of these three men are incorrect. At least two independent analyses of the photograph have concluded that the man alleged in the photo to be Lundy is Lundy. Albro III says there have been at least 2 live sighting reports of his father and little, if any, government follow-up. The most recent report was received by the Defense Intelligence Agency in January 1991, and as late as April 1992 had not been investigated. And while the Pentagon had a copy of the photograph in June 1990, it was not sent to the FBI for analysis until more than a year later, July 1991. Despite government inaction, Albro is not discouraged. He believes his father may be alive, and someday the truth about his father and American POWs in Southeast Asia will be known.
It's a long way away. It's half a world away. There are some incredibly powerful barriers and people keeping me separated from him. That ocean is a very powerful thing, but it can be tamed.
In hopes of discovering more about his father, Albro III's younger brother William has traveled to Southeast Asia, joining up with POW hunters Mark Smith and Al Schinkel. Schinkel and Smith have talked to numerous Thai and Laotian contacts they've developed over the years, and remain convinced Lundy is alive and is being held in Laos.
How do you feel that your government abandoned your father on somebody's own say? You feel resentment. You feel doubt in the sphere you're brought up in. You feel, wait a minute, something's not right here. But then you go on.
I think the worst emotion that you have through the years is despair. I've learned to not think about where my husband is or what's happening to him, because you can't think about that. You'll die.
"17 years after American involvement ended, the Vietnam War claimed another victim. Marion Shelton was the matriarch of the live POW movement. Her husband, Colonel Charles Shelton, was known to have been captured alive when his plane went down over Laos in April of 1965. He is the only official prisoner of war listed by the U.S. government. Unanswered questions and 25 years of waiting to be reunited with her husband was too much for Marion to bear. She had lost faith in her government. Washington, she believed, had failed her. Despair overwhelmed Marion Shelton. Feeling hopeless and alone, she took her own life in September 1990.
We were brought up to believe in our country that they would look after you, regardless of where you were. If you were an American citizen, you would be taken care of. And I've lost my faith in that. I can't believe that anymore.
Vera Hart no longer believes the U.S. government will help reunite her with her son Thomas. She says her hope is in private efforts and in God. Colonel Tom Hart was shot down near Pak Se, Laos in December 1972. The Pentagon attempted to return a set of remains to Hart's wife, Anne, in 1985. Believing her husband was still alive, Anne Hart refused to accept the remains. The government insisted and said they would be buried in Arlington Cemetery regardless of the family's wishes.
They were shoving it down our throats. We were going to do it whether we wanted to or not. We were going to be forced.
When the Thomas Hart case came up and the government said they recovered remains, I knew that to be an error, because men survived from that incident, and one was Thomas Hart.
Former National Security Agency analyst Jerry Mooney says shortly after Hart was shot down, He saw decrypted communications traffic indicating that Hart had been captured alive. Mooney says the information went unreported because an NSA senior analyst feared it would make him look bad because he possessed the information for more than 2 weeks.
I asked him, are you going to tell DIA, call him on the secure phone and say that you have confirmation that the North Vietnamese had captured Captain Hart and these other people in the message? He said, no, DIA doesn't have to know anything, quote, unquote, or know everything, quote, unquote. He then took the raw traffic, crumpled it up, and threw it into the burn bag, and it went to the shredder. The evidence was destroyed.
Mooney knew Thomas Hart was alive, and others knew the bones identified by the Army's Central Identification Lab were not Hart's.
It isn't a question that they made errors, it's that they lied.
Colorado State University forensic anthropologist Dr. Michael Charney examined the alleged remains of Thomas Hart after Ann Hart received a court order instructing the Army to turn them over for independent analysis.
You could not tell that those 7 pieces of bone even came from the same person, 1. There was no way of telling that they all belonged to one person. 2, the only thing you could tell from these bones is that it was somebody, was probably a male, over the age of 19, period. That's it, no more. You couldn't tell the race, you couldn't tell the height, you couldn't tell the age, perfectly nothing.
In 1986, Dr. William Maples, a physical anthropologist at the University of Florida, told members of Congress that a number of anthropologists had examined several sets of remains and agreed they were unidentifiable. Why then did the Army tell family members the remains were those of their loved ones when they were not identifiable? Was it incompetence? Maples describes it differently.
There seems to be a lot of window dressing in these reports and little substance.
Was someone pressuring the Central Identification Lab to make positive IDs so the MIA discrepancy case list could be shortened? Major General John Crosby, Army Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel.
The Central Identification Lab in the past, with the thousands of identifications that they've had over the years, have far and away been accurate in their identification. And if they are not identifiable, we will classify them as such, and that has been done with regularity, and we have not had, in my knowledge, any pressure.
The U.S. Army admitted mistakes had been made and said operational changes meant such misidentifications would not occur in the future. The case of Mark Dennis was the future. On July 22, 1966, the family of Mark Dennis was notified Mark had been killed in Vietnam, the victim of a helicopter crash and fire.
We accepted those facts in 1966. We buried what we thought was a 19-year-old. Excuse me. And the family went on as best we could with our life.
4 years later, Jerry's father saw this photo in an issue of Newsweek magazine dated November 30th, 1970. The magazine reported it as a picture of an unknown prisoner of war. The Dennises believed it was Mark. Navy intelligence told the family it could not disprove the photo, but believed the picture was of another man who came home in 1973. Jerry had his brother's body exhumed several times, and in 1987, it was examined by Dr. Charney. Jerry was shocked at the results. He's convinced the remains given to him by the U.S. government were not those of his brother.
I exhumed a body in Ohio and flew it to Colorado State University. We removed over 90 pounds of flesh from that body to get better measurements. The results of those tests and the ones I'd received in 1971, where I sent a brother off to war 6 feet tall, I got one back 5'5". Mark was Caucasian. The body is that of an Oriental. The Chinook helicopter, 25 years in the fire service, uses JP4 or JP5 non-leaded kerosene. This body's been blown up with American grenades and burned with regular gasoline. Dog tags pinned to a blanket wrapped around the body were burned by simply holding book matches underneath them, and they never exceeded 250 degrees Fahrenheit.
The Army insisted its identification was accurate because medical records stated Mark was approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, the same height as the body. But Dr. Charney says the medical records were incorrect. These photographs show Mark was taller, The woman pictured is 5 feet 5, 5 feet 7 with high-heeled shoes. Did the Army get tripped up on its own paperwork?
Mark Dennis was 6 feet tall, period. And there's no way you can stretch a height of those bones to somebody that measures 5, 6.5, 5 inches.
The best indicator of height was the left femur, but the Army Central Identification Lab took a sample from it to make a DNA match.
Why did they take it from there when they had all the other bones to take it from? They had dozens and dozens and dozens of bones to take it from. Why did they take it from that one? If one of my students did that in the bone ID class that I teach in the fall, I'd fail him.
While these remains were at the Central Identification Lab, they cut a section out of the left femur. It'll never again be measured for height. They crushed the tooth with a filling in it to use for DNA tests, which showed nothing, but the tooth is destroyed forever. That was done by the United States Army. After 25 years of arguing about the height and the tooth, the argument is over. They've destroyed both pieces of evidence.
Has anyone ever held you back or restrained your efforts to find somebody, or diverted information that you have provided, or covered up any information that you have provided? Yes, sir.
Several sets of fingerprints came with this now famous photo of 3 Americans. Albro Lundy III explained to the Senate Select Committee on POW MIA Affairs that if the fingerprints could be matched with those on file with the U.S. government, he could prove beyond a doubt that his father is still alive. This government document confirmed Albro Lundy II had been fingerprinted.
My father's fingerprints had been checked out, and the government had a set of fingerprints in his file. That very file I was looking at, much to my amazement, when I flipped it over to find the attachment, there was no fingerprint card attached. This is a smoking gun letter that there is cover-up in our government. It couldn't possibly happen if there wasn't, because guess what? Somebody had to pull that card from his file.
Once printed, copies of the fingerprints are usually placed on file with numerous government agencies. But the fingerprint files for all 3 men in the photo have mysteriously vanished throughout the government. None of them can be located. Not only are fingerprint documents disappearing, birth certificates are also vanishing. Gladys Fleckenstein told members of the committee that birth certificates of her MIA son have turned up missing.
Senator Smith, that isn't all of it either, because when I was looking to get fingerprints, I went to the Hall of Records in downtown Los Angeles. They had no birth certificate on my son, but they have on the other 2 of my sons. I went to Sacramento. They have no birth certificate on my son. DMV, the hospital records, there are no fingerprints to be had anywhere.
Why would fingerprints and birth certificates disappear? Was someone trying to sabotage efforts to verify these American prisoners are still alive? If there has been a cover-up by elements within the U.S. government, what is the reason for it? When did it start, and why? If there is a cover-up, it may have started as early as June 1973, 2 months after the Pentagon declared the POWs dead. This memo, dated June 11, 1973, was from the American Embassy in Saigon to the U.S. Secretary of State in Washington. It discussed a report by a North Vietnamese defector. He had seen 6 American prisoners of war who had not been released. The memo states that the American officer present at the interview requested news services to play down the details. Rather than a cover-up of the existence of live American prisoners of war, former DIA Chief General Eugene Tai says there is a mindset to debunk information. Colonel Millard Peck agrees. The highly decorated Vietnam War hero resigned as head of the Pentagon Special Office on POW MIA Affairs in February 1991. In his letter of resignation, He charged that his office was being used as a, quote, toxic waste dump to bury the whole mess. He claimed the Defense Intelligence Agency practiced a damage limitation drill on the issue, and he termed the handling of the matter a farce conducted with smoke and mirror tactics to stall the issue until it dies a natural death.
If one group of people in the government, in the White House, in the State Department, and in the high quarters of the Pentagon are saying that all the prisoners are dead, and that's their unofficial line. I mean, they all seem to agree on that. Another group of people working in the same Pentagon are really not going to knock themselves out to prove that their bosses are wrong. So no one is really enthusiastic about finding live prisoners.
And the criteria was always jacked up. But after Smith and McIntyre, I'm willing to concede the probability of a cover-up.
Major Mark Smith and Sergeant Melvin McIntyre brought suit against the U.S. government on behalf of the POWs and MIAs. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled the case was a foreign policy matter, not one for judicial review. Nevertheless, Smith provided revealing testimony and charges of cover-up before the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee in 1986. Mark Smith was a highly decorated Vietnam War veteran who became commander of U.S. Special Forces Detachment Korea. Smith says he and McIntyre were tasked by the Army to gather intelligence on American POWs. He says in April 1984, a high-ranking Thai general officer told him 3 American POWs would be available for extrication from Laos the following month. Smith explained what happened when he presented a briefing paper, including that information and other intelligence concerning POWs, to Army Major General K.C. Luer.
After reading the 2 cover letters, this general turned white, handed the briefing pack back to me, and said, quote, "This is too hot for me to handle, big guy." I told him at that time, if you as a major general can't handle this, what am I supposed to do with it? I was told that if I was smart, what I would do was put the briefing through a shredder and forget the entire issue.
Major General Luer denied the charges and said Smith and McIntyre were never given approval to hunt for POWs in Southeast Asia. Smith says he gave a copy of a memo signed by Luer granting the approval to the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. Smith says he and McIntyre were disappointed with Congress and with the U.S. Army.
Both of us had faith in the Army. And we thought that if people from the intelligence agencies were trying to shut this thing down, that we would eventually meet the honorable man on a white horse in the Army. Well, I have to tell you, partner, there isn't one.
Bo Gritz has sometimes been thought of as that man on the white horse who could rescue the American POWs. He says his Lazarus team of former Special Forces operatives have attempted actual rescue operations 4 times. And 4 times their efforts have been sabotaged at the last minute near the Thai-Lao border by someone. Gritz tells of a deal made in 1987 involving the Premier of Laos and the U.S. National Security Council to return American prisoners for a ransom.
Khe Sanh had allowed us access to 4 prisoners at that time that could have been brought out. And he said, if you keep it secret, we will continue to ferret out American POWs as long as the Vietnamese and the Russians don't learn about it. They might or might not have continued that operation, but they cut the Lazarus team out.
If there has not been a POW cover-up, at the very least there has been an effort to suppress information about POWs from becoming public. Senator Charles Grassley of Iowa.
Why is it exploded? Because it's been covered up so long. Where sun shines in, there won't be any mold. And so all we need is access to information.
Family members of the missing in action have complained that they have repeatedly been denied access to government files about their loved ones.
10 times I was denied access to my father's file. Why can't I don't need to take the information out of DIA. I just wanted to look at it. I just wanted to see what was in there that I couldn't see.
The executive director of the American Legion, John Summer, suggests the communists have been more forthcoming with some information than the Pentagon.
We actually receive more hard information from the Vietnamese than we have from the Defense Intelligence Agency, Department of Defense, or any other American entity involved with this issue.
Not only has their access been denied, but some family members and POW MIA activists complain their phones have been tapped. Some, like Jerry Mooney, say they have received threatening phone calls. Others, like Jerry Dennis, say they've been followed. And others have been discredited publicly by government officials. One of the most publicized cases was that of Bobby Garwood, 6 years after all POWs in Southeast Asia were declared dead by the U.S. government. Marine Private Robert Garwood was released from Hanoi. He was court-martialed for aiding and abetting the enemy. He later told of seeing at least 70 other American prisoners, all after the last POW was said to have returned home from Indochina.
Let the American people know, make them realize, hey, I am not the last one home.
And his first note that he smuggled out said, I know of other American prisoners, which resulted in a national security memo going to President Carter, warning him that a prisoner is about to come out and it's going to cause problems, political problems, and we've got to anticipate those problems.
Bill and Monica Stevenson are co-authors of the book Kiss the Boys Goodbye. Monica was a CBS 60 Minutes producer. Bill wrote several best-selling books, including 90 Minutes at Entebbe and A Man Called Intrepid. The Stevensons give the Garwood case considerable discussion in Kiss the Boys Goodbye.
The real significance of Garwood is that he was a prisoner who came home, and it was too much of an embarrassment for the U.S. government, so they destroyed the rest of his life. His life up to that point had already been destroyed. But by court-martialing him, by taking away every vestige of respectability, they destroyed his life, and they, of course, used him to make the whole issue of prisoners a farce.
The Pentagon appeared to go to great lengths to discredit Garwood. Claims that Garwood saw American prisoners bathing at a cistern in Hanoi were not true, said the Defense Intelligence Agency. No such cistern existed. But during a visit to Vietnam in 1986, an ABC 2020 camera crew filmed former Congressman Billy Hendon leading some of his congressional colleagues to the location described by Garwood. The cistern was there, just as Garwood described it. Garwood had told the truth. Why have not American prisoners been returned home after all these years? It's been suggested the Vietnamese want the billions they were promised by the Nixon administration to rebuild their country, and that American politicians want to protect themselves. Senator David Boren is chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. He is among the most informed officials in Washington regarding U.S. intelligence. He reportedly told the Daily Oklahoman in early 1992 he believes a lot of POWs were left in Laos. Boren suggested a cover-up, saying those who knew the truth, quote, kept handing it on. There are people in the military and otherwise in the foreign policy establishment who feel they're going to be embarrassed now if this comes out. And so they keep it secret, Boren said. It has to come out, and it will, end quote.
It's very hard for people in high profiles in the political and policy business to admit they made a mistake. So I think egos is a major part of the problem as well. Nobody can stand up and say, well, I messed up, I'm sorry, and then take the accountability and responsibility and resolve it. That takes a lot of guts, and in our political world, I don't think too many politicians have guts.
Prisoners of war coming home are going to cause America to come back to reality. They're going to start asking questions like, if the government has been lying all this time about prisoners, what else have they been lying about?
It's time to wake up. The only person who's going to bring a prisoner home is you. You've got to send Washington a message. Call 1-800-USA-MIAs. That's 1-800-USA-MIAS. Let's bring our men home. Now.
See the hippie boys in the photograph. I knew them well in '69. I I stayed home, they went to Nam. Some are still missing after all this time. Near Dien Bien Phu or the plain of Jars. Did they fall? Tell me where they are. Don't kiss the boys goodbye. Let them hear freedom call until we find them all. Don't take the time to stop and cry. Don't kiss the boys goodbye. Walk down the long black wall, see those names in stone. Let's keep our promise to bring their brothers home. Don't kiss the boys goodbye. Let them hear freedom's call until we find them all. Don't take the time to stop and cry. Don't kiss the boys. Don't kiss the boys goodbye. See the hippie boys in the photograph. I knew them well in '69. I stayed home, they went to Nam. Some are still missing after all this time. Near Dien Bien Phu or the plain of Jars. Did they fall? Tell me where they are. Don't kiss the boys goodbye. Let them hear freedom call until we find them all. Don't take the time to stop and cry. Don't kiss the boys goodbye. Walk down the long black wall, see those names in stone. Let's keep